If you want to live a happier, more joyful, and more successful life, look no further than the fifth house. The fifth house in astrology represents everything that you do simply because you love to do it, simply because it's pleasurable, it brings you joy, it makes you happy, it lights you up. It's also in traditional astrology connected to our success, and across the board, it is the house to look at if your concern is your children or your ability to have children, because this is the house of children and fertility. In this video, I'm going to cover everything you need to know about all of the 10 astrological planets in the fifth house. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you download my free Astrology 101 quick reference guide at the link down in the description below to prepare before we move on by understanding which planets, if any, you have in the fifth house and a little bit more about what they mean for you personally. And also make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an important astrology tutorial, forecast, or update. I post a new video every single Saturday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, and you're not going to want to miss the ones that I have coming up because I'm going to be completing this series on the planets in the houses. And yes, there is a whole series. We only have a couple of videos left, and you can find the playlist for that down in the description below to watch after this one. All right, so before we dive into the planets in the fifth house, we really need to get a deep understanding of what the fifth house means in astrology. The fifth house is one of the most positive, uplifting areas of the birth chart. It's fundamentally about joy, creativity, self-expression, and things you do simply because they light you up, simply because you want to. It's hobbies, it's interests, it's entertainment, it's theater, it's performance, and also, of course, it rules children. This is the house of what you love, what brings you happiness, and what allows you to express yourself fully. In traditional Hellenistic astrology, the fifth house is known as the house of good fortune. It is one of the positive, good places in the birth chart because this house makes a trine to the ascendant by sign-based aspect. In fact, this is one of the most positive energies in the birth chart when it comes to the houses. This means that the fifth house is associated with ease, blessings, positive outcomes, and planets in this house are considered to become more benefic and easier to work with, and they tend to support you in some way. And even the malefic planets, which traditionally are Mars and Saturn, become less problematic in this place. The fifth house is a succedent house, which means it's associated with building something up, growth, and actual physical material outcomes. And traditionally, Venus is the planet that rejoices in the fifth house. That means Venus does its best work here, and it means that the significations of the fifth house are very tied in with the energy of Venus. Venus rules pleasure, Venus rules relationships and sensual connections, Venus rules play, Venus rules artwork and creativity, Venus rules all things that we enjoy and find pleasurable. And so it's no surprise that Venus loves to sit in the fifth house. So when you combine all of these traditional significations, the fifth house becomes a place of creation, a place of enjoyment, a place of growth and development, and a place of ease, blessing, and yes, good fortune. The fifth house is where life is expressed, enjoyed, and brought into physical manifestation in a way that is very supportive and often very rewarding. Now, when it comes to the significations of the fifth house, the one that is agreed upon across the board, across all traditions, is the fact that the fifth house is deeply connected to children. It's connected to the children we bear, it's connected to the children that we interact with in our life, but primarily it is our biological children and the children we adopt and raise in our lives. And so the fifth house is very connected to what that looks like for us. Do we have a stable, good relationship with our children in childhood and into adulthood? Do we have the ability to bear children even? Because fertility is very much ruled by the fifth house. The fifth house in medical astrology is the house you're going to want to look at if you're looking into fertility issues and trying to figure out what's going on there. The benefic planets in the fifth house are considered really positive and prosperous and fertile when it comes to children, and the malefic planets are considered a little bit less so. I will state as a caveat that the fifth house and what planets are in the fifth house are only one small part of the equation when it comes to determining fertility and looking at issues pertaining to fertility in the birth chart in medical astrology. So I definitely don't want you to self-diagnose yourself with anything because medical astrology is not not a diagnostic tool, and I don't want you to freak out or worry if you have something a little bit wonky in your fifth house and you're somebody who really wants to have children. It does not mean it won't happen. I've seen time and time again that most people have a mixed energy when it comes to fertility and when it comes to children, and you really have to weigh the entire chart to see the full picture of what's going on. Now, if you're assessing the chart to look at differences between each child that you give birth to or each child that your wife or your partner gives birth to, the fifth house is the house that's going to represent most specifically that firstborn child. The third from the fifth, which would be the seventh, is going to be the secondborn, and so on and so forth. The firstborn child's sibling. And then the sibling sibling and the sibling sibling. And so that's a really interesting way that you can look at your birth chart to determine what's going to happen with multiple pregnancies, how each child is going to be different, and how your relationship to each child is going to be different. It gets really deep, and you can go all the way up to, as many children as you want to look at in the birth chart. But that said, the fifth house is connected to all of your children as well. So it's not just the firstborn child, it's all of the children. It's only when you're trying to distinguish between each child for something specific in a reading or a prediction or in a horary reading or something like that, that you're gonna need to be looking at these multiple houses. I mentioned just a moment ago that the fifth house is the traditional house of good fortune. And part of this is because in traditional astrology, the fifth house is associated with honor, with recognition, with fame, with leadership qualities. It's associated with riches, success, power, and generosity. And while the 10th house does rule your public reputation, there is definitely something to be said about the energy of the fifth house when it comes to fame and recognition. Speaking of reputation, because the fifth house follows the fourth house, it is the house that rules what happens after your death, how people view you and talk about you and remember you after your passing in traditional astrology. Again, there is some overlap here with the energy of the fifth and the energy of the 10th here, so I highly recommend looking at both. Because the fifth house is also the second from the fourth in derivative houses, it also represents profits from property that you own, from actual physical land that you might have or homes that you might own. It can also represent wealth or money tied to your parents. It literally represents your parents' money, and it can sometimes show interesting information about the inheritance that you might get from your family lineage. In a traditional context, the fifth being the second from the fourth makes a lot of sense because back in the day, children were considered to be a huge asset. They were very profitable. You could utilize them for labor, working on a farm, or helping in the home. They also represented security in old age, and they were a form of social status for women because a lot of their status was tied to their fertility. So this ties children very literally to value, contribution, and household resources in a traditional sense. And we can't talk about the fifth house without talking about its connection to romance, to sex, to sexuality. It is the house of procreation, after all. It's the house of fertility. It's also the house of things that we enjoy, that we find pleasurable. Venus has its joy in this house for a reason. Venus is all about connection, partnership, and sensuality. It is the planet of pleasure on both a material level and a sensual level and on a partnership level. And so, of course, it has its joy here. And of course, the fifth house is connected to sex. Now, if you had studied only modern Western astrology, you might think that the 8th house is connected to sex, but it's not connected in the way that you think. Most forms of sex, most forms of sensuality and romantic connection are in the 5th house, and it's been that way for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's only very recently with the 12-letter alphabet system of the signs, planets, and houses where we kind of arbitrarily connected the 8th house to Scorpio, and for some reason decided Scorpio was super connected to sex. That's probably mostly because of the Mars connection there, and there is definitely some connection to sex and the sex organs with Scorpio. However, the 8th house is not what you think it is here. Just trust me, play with it a little bit, experiment. You're going to find that the 5th house has a lot more to do with it. And so the 5th house is connected to sexual desire, romantic sexuality. This includes sex before marriage, sex after marriage, sex specifically for procreation and trying to have a child. And so it's very pleasure-based, romantic, and very physically creative in nature. The 5th house also rules boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, courtship, dating. It also represents love affairs and extramarital affairs that can very often be seen in the 5th house, as well as definitely the 7th house. You're going to want to look at that too, but we'll get to that in a different video. Speaking of pleasure, the 5th house rules literally anything that brings you pleasure and joy. It rules entertainment, it rules fine dining, it rules restaurants, it rules concerts, it rules performance, theater, music, it rules dancing, it rules anything that you're doing just for your own enjoyment and pleasure. It also rules the hobbies, the interests, the passion pursuits that you do just because you love to do them. It's the house of creativity and creative self-expression, of course, because it's tied to Venus. And so artists usually have a really strong 5th house energy. Anyone who paints, anyone who performs is going to want to look at that 5th house. It's also the house of sports, and it's the house of gambling as well. So it's kind of like this pleasurable pursuit of chance that people do. It's really any form of playful risk-taking that you're doing for your enjoyment. And so the 5th house is tied to creative expression, performance and the arts, and all things that bring you joy. If you enjoyed that dive into the 5th house and what it means from both a modern and traditional astrological perspective, you're going to love what we're cooking up in the Beginner's Astrology Bootcamp. I am releasing all new mini lessons on each of the 12 houses where you're going to get a deep dive and a much better understanding of how they differ from the energy of the signs and the planets, which you're also going to learn about. We have mini lessons on all 10 planets and all 12 zodiac signs, in addition to the newly released videos on the houses. On top of that, we are doing a live 2-week integrative boot camp where you guys are going to get extra workshops, study group sessions where you can practice your interpretations and get feedback in real time. And you're going to have some bonus live Q&A calls with myself and my expert teaching assistants. Now, joining us live is optional because you are going to be getting the recordings and lifetime access to the recordings, but it's highly recommended. You can find more information at the link down in the description below. And if you join us before our kickoff call at 9 a.m. Mountain Time on April 13th, you're going to get a massive discount on your enrollment as well. And you'll get access to the workshops that are going to help you integrate everything you're learning and put it all together to actually start making your own interpretations. Again, the link is down in the description below, and I cannot wait to see you in class. Now let's dive deep into what it means to have each of the 10 astrological planets in the 5th house. But before we do, I want to mention that if you don't have any planets in the 5th house, that's completely okay. We have a separate video for that on my channel. You can search it. It's just called Empty Houses in the Birth Chart, or you can watch it after this one. We are not going to be covering anything that is not a planet, but I do have videos on Chiron in all of the houses, Ceres in all of the houses, and the North and South nodes in all of the houses for people who are interested in that. All right, so let's start with the sun. The sun in astrology represents the soul's expression of purpose in physical reality. It's what you need to feel lit up and successful about life. It is your vitality and life force energy. And when you're not connected to the energy of your sun, your physical energy gets very depleted. It can lead to some sort of depressive state. It can lead you to feel much more melancholy. It can lead you to feel like you don't have the energy to go about your day. And so it's very important, if you have the sun in the 5th house, to connect with what brings you joy every single day, to connect with your creativity every single day. The thing that you are here to express in this lifetime is your creativity, is the things that you love and that light you up and that you're very passionate about. This is an excellent placement for leadership and success and potentially even fame. This is you being recognized or well known for something that you're really, really good at, something that you really enjoy doing. This is also a really great energy for entrepreneurship because the fifth house is your creative self-expression, the things that you do as a hobby that sometimes you might turn into a side hustle or a business. And especially because Sun in the fifth house imbues you with leadership qualities, leading a business, going it alone, right? Having this independent thing that you're doing where you are in charge can be very valuable and you can be very successful at it. Sun in the fifth house also indicates that you might find meaning and purpose through your connection with children. Not just your own children, but if you are somebody who doesn't have children, can't have children, or is choosing not to have children, that is completely okay. You can still connect with this childlike energy, this curiosity, this joy, through connecting with other people's children, nieces, nephews, friends, and family. All of that is applicable. Sometimes you'll find people who have Sun in the fifth house actually have a career path that is connected to children. They teach, they run a daycare, they are a nanny of some kind. All of these things, again, can be very nourishing to that fifth house Sun energy, and it can really ignite your vitality. Romance, passion, pleasure are all things that you really need in your life. You feel lit up when you are in a relationship and the romance, the flame keeps burning. Also, entertainment is really important to you. So when you are not able to go out and do the things that you love, that are just for fun, that are just for you, you are going to feel much more depleted. You could also be an entertainer of some kind. This is a great energy for performance. This is a great energy for doing something artistic and sharing it with the world. Even if it's not your primary job or the way that you earn income, it's something that you need because it feeds your soul. Remember, the sun is the soul's expression of purpose. It's your connection to your higher self and something bigger than you. And the fifth house is all about doing that creatively. The moon represents your emotional state. It's your inner world. It's your subjective reality. It's the way that you feel and express your emotions. It's your intuition. It also represents the way that you nourish yourself and what helps you to feel comfortable, safe, and secure on an internal, more emotional feelings level. The moon also represents your intuition and your creativity. The moon is also a very creative planet and a very fertile planet. It's connected to nurturing and motherhood. And so it's no surprise that having the moon in the fifth house of children can make you very nurturing toward children, even children that are not your own. You can have this nurturing, almost motherly quality regardless of your gender. Children can feel safe, secure, and cared for when they are in your presence. This is also a good indicator for fertility unless your moon is debilitated in some way. And so that could be happy news if that's something that you're aiming for. The moon in the fifth house also indicates that creativity is very important to you, but a specific type of creativity. Unlike the sun, which needs recognition for your creative pursuits, the moon is more about getting internal gratification and expressing your emotions through creative forms like performance, like artwork, like doing something that you love that helps you express your emotions through some sort of creative outlet. Because the moon is your mood and emotions, having the moon in the fifth house can indicate being a lot more optimistic. It is the house of joy, right? And so this is a very beautiful, harmonious, almost jovial, joyful expression of the moon's energy. I've found that people with the moon in the fifth house or a connection to the fifth house with the moon tend to have this quality where even when things are really dire, even when other people might feel despondent or depressed or feel like they need to give up, they have this internal reserve. They have this internal optimism. They have this way of feeling through things and sensing things that helps them find the positive, and that can really carry them through really difficult times. That is also a big part of how they nourish and nurture other people, including their children, including other children. Then we have Mercury. Mercury rules communication, and so it's no surprise that people who have Mercury in the fifth house love to express themselves creatively through writing, through speaking, through singing even. This can be all about speech, it can be all about the voice, but really it's all about communicating your thoughts and ideas in a way that is creative, in a way that lights you up, in a way that gets other people feeling really lit up and passionate about what it is that you have to convey. These people tend to be excellent public speakers that command attention. It's almost a performance for them when they're they're sharing information or telling a tale, even amongst their friends. They love to be the center of attention when they have an idea to share, especially when they have that creative spark involved with the idea that they're sharing. When it comes to children and fertility, Mercury's neutral. It's not positive or negative. In traditional astrology, it is a neutral planet. It really depends on what else it's doing in terms of its dignity, in terms of the aspects that it's making with other planets. And so that's going to give you the deciding factor of whether this is positive or negative there. Because Mercury is associated with teaching and sharing ideas and education, and the fifth house has a lot to do with children, you might find that some people who have Mercury in the fifth house have a talent for teaching children or an affinity for teaching children. They might do storytelling. They might write children's stories very literally. And this is also a really great one if you are somebody who wants to homeschool your kids. And so as we already know from earlier in this video, Venus has its joy in the fifth house. That means it's able to express itself in the most optimal, most abundant way in the fifth house, which is the house of good fortune. Venus is traditionally a benefic planet, and in the fifth house, it brings benefits to all fifth house topics and themes. That means it can say yes to creative opportunities. That means it can bring and enhance your personal creativity and your creative expression. It brings romance and sensuality, and it makes this a very important part of your life and something that you're very good at. Venus is also very fertile, and in the fifth house of children, it can bring enhanced fertility. It can bring really positive energy around children. It typically brings a really close, really beautiful and harmonious connection with your children if you have any. Unless Venus is doing something super wonky, it's really going to only bring things that are beneficial when it comes to your relationship with any children that you have. When it comes to what brings you joy, having Venus in the fifth house means that connection with other people brings you joy. You don't want to just go out on the town or do something for fun because you love it. You want to do it because you and your partner love it. You want to do it because you love the connection that comes with whatever activity, whatever hobby, whatever interest that you love to pursue. This is also a great energy just for enhancing success overall, enhancing your charisma and likability, because this is a planet that will be in a sign-based trine with your ascendant, and so it lights you up in a way that makes you more beautiful, more likable, more charismatic, much more easily able to work in harmony with other people, much more agreeable with other people, even if you're not necessarily a pushover. That's not what I'm saying here, but it makes it so you can very easily understand the perspective of others and harmonize it in a way that's very optimistic and joyful. And this just makes you a very optimistic person, probably very fun to be around, very creative, and so this is a beautiful placement for Venus. Mars is a traditionally malefic planet that rules things like arguments, disputes, disagreements, discord, separation. It says no to things. It represents violence. It represents very literally blood if you're talking about a medical astrology perspective, and accidents. However, any malefic planet that is situated in a benefic good house, like the fifth house, becomes a little bit easier to deal with. And so Mars in the fifth house ignites your passions. And because Mars does have such a strong connection with sex and sexual expression, this is a really intense energy that enhances your sexuality. It enhances your need and your sexual drive. It's also a planet of passion and ambition. It can make you very, very ambitious toward goals and ideas that are creative in nature. It can make you a real go-getter when it comes to leadership and success. It can make you a motivating force for others, because in the fifth house, Mars becomes much more optimistic, much more leadership oriented. You are here to lead by example and to show a positive example of what is possible. And so it's not leading by force here, it's leading by being a force to be reckoned with. And even though Mars is not the most fertile planet, not all is lost when it comes to fertility if you have Mars in the fifth house. You really have to look at what Mars is doing, its dignity, the other planets in your fifth house, the ruler of your fifth house, and so many other factors like Venus and the moon for women to really understand the full picture of fertility. However, this is one testimony that's a little bit iffy there. It can also indicate that your children are very lively, very energized, very ambitious, especially your firstborn child might be a lot to deal with, might be very energetic. Jupiter does well in the fifth house too, because Jupiter is very expansive, very optimistic. It is a benefic planet, and the benefic planets are both made more benefic in the 5th house. Even though Venus is the best here because it has its joy, Jupiter still brings blessings. It's the planet of expansion. It's the planet of wisdom, especially wisdom gained through experience. And so one of the things that really brings you joy is obtaining new wisdom, studying different philosophies, different ideas, going to different places and having experiences that broaden your horizons and shape your reality in a bigger picture way. Jupiter also says yes to things and can bring a lot of good fortune and benefits to you personally because it is in trine with the sign that contains your ascendant by a sign-based traditional trine. Jupiter in the 5th house expands on creativity, expands on play, expands on you just really needing to do the things that you love to do because you love to do them. And a lot of what you love to do has to do with adventure and gaining new knowledge, gaining new wisdom. Then we have Saturn in the 5th house. Saturn is the second traditionally malefic planet. It brings limitations, restrictions, hardship, lessons, and it says no to things. It also rules time, and it usually makes things take longer than you want them to. Saturn in the 5th house is not all bad, and just as with Mars, having Saturn in the 5th house actually lessens its blow and makes it a lot easier to deal with. It makes you very determined, it makes you very self-disciplined, it makes it so you are very easily able to build up to what it is that you want to accomplish. It gives you staying power, it makes you much more grounded and much more easily able to accomplish things that take a very long time. But it also does have its drawbacks. Saturn in the 5th house can pose limitations and restrictions on your ability to do things that bring you joy. It's kind of like you feel like doing all the fun stuff, going out to a restaurant, going out to a concert, engaging in your hobbies. These pursuits are all a lot of work and a lot of effort, and you might feel guilty about actually doing them. The hobbies and interests and passion pursuits that you do have and that you do engage with, you always want them to be practical. You always want them to be building toward or leading towards something, and this is a very common placement for turning your passions into some sort of business. It's taking something fun and turning it into work. When it comes to children, this can indicate delays or hardships when it comes to conceiving. It does not mean that you won't conceive. What I've seen most commonly here is that you might have to try a little bit harder, it might take a little bit longer, or you might conceive a little bit later in life than what you might want, but it does not absolutely say no to children. However, if you do have a bunch of other indicators in the birth chart, this could be something that pushes it in that direction. And for you, children are going to feel like a huge weight, a huge responsibility. For those who have Saturn in the 5th house and you do have children, you're going to feel like it really puts a huge limitation and restriction on your ability to enjoy yourself, to go out and have fun, to enjoy romance and pleasure and sexual expression. And so that could be another thing that's associated with Saturn in the 5th house. Saturn in the 5th house also makes romance feel like a lot of work. And so dating feels like this huge kind of drag for people who have Saturn in the 5th house. In fact, Saturn in the 5th house people tend to prefer long-term committed partnerships. They do not like dating around. Uranus in the 5th house creates instability around all of these 5th house topics and themes. When it comes to your hobbies and the things that you love to do, you need to do a lot of different things. You like to jump around from thing to thing, not staying with any one topic, any one pursuit, any one creative form of expression for very long. And if you do stay with it for a long time, it's usually something highly unusual. In fact, all of your favorite pastimes, all of the things that light you up that you do because you love to do them, are probably considered unusual to the people around you because it's outside of the box and it's different from the norm. When it comes to your romantic life, you like variety. You might have some things that you're into that other people might not quite understand, and that's completely okay. You also need a lot of excitement and a lot of newness in your romantic life. You need to be constantly doing new and exciting things in partnership to keep that spark alive. When it comes to children, this often indicates unintended or unexpected pregnancy, not always the case, but sometimes the case. And it can indicate that children can be a very disruptive force in your life. However, they help keep things fresh and keep things exciting for you, and you might choose to raise your children in a very alternative way. Neptune is the planet of spirituality and mysticism, and when you have Neptune in the 5th house, you are probably deeply involved with spiritual practices and spirituality is a big part of your hobbies, your passion pursuits. It's what lights you up. You like going to different spiritual events. You like studying spirituality, practicing spirituality. Neptune also rules photography and painting. And so this is a really great energy for doing either of those things. Really, any creative self-expression where you are creating sort of an image of reality or an alternate reality through what it is that you are creating, that can be really great for Neptune in the 5th house. Also film, right? Film is a very Neptunian thing, and so that could be something that you could engage with as a hobby or even maybe as a profession that you might really love to do. It does bring a lot of nebulousness and confusion around your love life and your romantic life, especially when you're in the dating scene prior to marriage, and so it makes it so you're not seeing your partners very clearly until you make that commitment, in which case you're going to have a deep, spiritual, beautiful connection with your partner. This placement also makes you deeply intuitive and very sensitive, but in a way that is manageable and that is actually helpful to you. And when it comes to children, this is not a positive or a negative, but it is an indicator that you might not fully understand or see your firstborn child clearly or any of your children clearly. You have those rose-colored glasses. You either see the best in them at all times, which is the most likely scenario, or if Neptune is doing something a little bit more challenging, you might sometimes assume that they're lying to you or deceiving you or up to no good when really they're not really doing much of anything. And so it can be hard to get a clear read on your children because there is going to be a bias there and a cloudiness. And finally, Pluto in the 5th house. Pluto is the planet of intensity, passion, obsession. It's the planet of compulsion. It's the planet of magnetism. It's the planet that in modern astrology is associated with not just death, but empowerment and rebirth. Pluto in the 5th house instills very strong leadership qualities. It makes it so you are very easily able to come back from anything that life throws at you. It instills a deeply regenerative quality, both physically and psychologically. Pluto in the 5th house also indicates that the things that you really love to do, the things that bring you joy, you can become absolutely obsessed with. You are either all in and you are down those rabbit holes and you really want to engage with it, or you are completely all out. And you can be all in on something for many years and then suddenly it lacks that same obsessive quality. It lacks that same passion. You're no longer linked to it and then you're just done. You're just done. This also instills a similar quality when you are dating. So you're either all in or all out of a relationship. This can be really good for long-term committed partnerships because once you're in it, you are deeply loyal. But when you're on the dating scene, things can get kind of intense and there can be this all in or all out mentality. Also, Pluto is a kind of an intense energy around children. And so I have seen this bring up issues involving fertility, especially miscarriage, not always the case, but sometimes the case. But I've also just seen this describe your relationship with your children or describe the child itself, especially your firstborn child. It could just indicate that you have a very independent, very passionate, very intense child on your hands. And so that is something that you might have to learn how to work with. But overall, this is a very positive placement for deep, intensive creative work where you are able to really dive in and put all of yourself into the thing that you're passionate about. It can also indicate that some of your passions are very Plutonian. They could indicate being interested in magic and the occult, being interested in things that are dark or deep or considered more taboo, being interested in things like life after death, being interested in things like death itself. All of these things could be very Plutonian influences on your 5th house. There you have it. That is all of the 10 astrological planets in your 5th house. If you had an aha moment, if something really resonated with you, comment below and let us know. I love reading all of your comments, and I always try to leave that little heart at least, even if I can't respond to all of them. So definitely comment below. If you like this video, like it, subscribe to my channel, and make sure you share this with a friend who has planets in their 5th house as well. And I really hope to see you at the live round of the Beginner's Astrology Bootcamp, or if you're watching this later on, you can still join the Beginner's Astrology Bootcamp and get access to all of the recordings, all of the workshops, and all of the self-paced lessons on the signs, planets, and houses, so you can get a really strong, really accurate foundation for your astrological understanding and practice, not just if you want to become a professional astrologer, because you don't need to want that in order to benefit from the Beginner's Astrology Bootcamp. This is really for anyone who just wants to benefit from astrology. This is for anyone who wants to understand these videos better, because it's hard to really utilize this in real life if you don't have those foundations and you don't know how to integrate them. All right, so the link for that is down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.